Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Eric Curtis. Lovely to have you on the show. Looking forward to our conversation, Eric.
Thanks for the invite, Simon. Appreciate it.
So a fellow adoptee, and I love to start with this question: what comes to your mind when you hear the name of the podcast, Thriving Adoptees? What does that evoke for you?
Well, I think the thing in adoption is there can be some stigma around it, and I love the idea that you're trying to build kind of a positive, successful image to being adopted, because I know many adopted people, and they're highly successful, and it's also as we grow older, we get a lot of learnings in our life, and it's sometimes nice to share those for others' benefit and success.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what the show is about. But there's lots of adoptee podcasts out there. Many of them focus on the story of our adoption. So we may have some relinquishment trauma. We may have gone through some tough stuff in our adoptive family. And yeah, there's this feeling that we're kind of wedded to our story somehow.
Right.
Whereas I think one of the most important learnings I had was I had a story in my head about who I was and about why my birth mother gave me up. And when I found out that wasn't true, that was one of the biggest learnings of my life. It was a moment when my beliefs were busted, right? So I had this idea that she didn't love me enough to keep me. And when I got the document, when 8 years after having that volcano of anger erupting within me, I found out that wasn't the truth at all.
Right.
She placed me for adoption out of desire for the best for me, really. So that's why I like to look at learnings, those aha moments, epiphanies, those moments when our beliefs are proved to be untrue and we learn something new about ourselves. So that's why we focus on learnings rather than the stories, and why we're focusing on sharing learnings so that hopefully the listener can take some of our learnings and, well, hopefully those learnings spark or catalyze some learnings within them, and that helps them along their
that's a great mission for the podcast.
Yeah, it is all about belief busting and trauma, healing trauma. And one of the things that I'm looking at the moment that's big on the moment in terms of learnings, Eric, is that in the personal development world, which I spent a lot of time in, there is this there's a big focus on busting beliefs, but we don't hear much about beliefs in the adoptee world. What we hear about is trauma all the time, right? We hear about trauma. And yet it seems to me that busting beliefs is somehow an easier thing than healing trauma. Do you get that feeling? Does busting beliefs seem easier than healing trauma, or how do you see the relationship between those two things?
I mean, I think the way I look at busting beliefs is to allow people to see two sides of a coin, right? Both the positive and the negative. So whether that was a trauma that helped shape the character that you are today and gave you a lot of strengths as a result of that is a positive thing, or the misconceptions that we may have, right, about why we were given up for adoption, and then being able to see both sides of the coin, not only from your own perspective, but from somebody else's, perhaps a birth parent. Yeah. And so I almost look at them, very similarly, is that the beliefs we have are shaped by our perceptions, and sometimes our perceptions are too narrow. or they're too tough to look at the negative side, right? A lot of times we like to stay in a state of elation, right, where we're only looking at the positive and we didn't really look at the negative. So we don't really have a balanced perspective. Or, as in trauma, we have a really negative experience that's anchored in our heads. And we don't really look at all the benefits that gave us, no matter how traumatic it was. But maybe it shaped your character. Maybe you're a stronger person as a result of it. I think we get too lopsided, whether it's in reshaping beliefs or looking at trauma, and we look at them through the wrong lens versus a balanced perspective.
Yeah. So it's a more kind of adult kind of pros and cons approach. You're looking at perhaps a little bit more detached.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're in it. I mean, I didn't really have a good objective view until I got older in life to understand where some of my negatives were coming from, or what they were even attributed to, or what they might have been associated with. But as a result of looking at them, I can see all the benefits that provided me in terms of, digging deeper to self-explore, to learning more about myself, to learning, to wanting to meet my birth family, and things of that nature. So what I found is kind of lacking, or as a negative, became, I don't want to say purpose, but, became mission or goals in my life that helped really shape character, and just, allow me to just mature a little bit more, and, find a little bit more, find more pieces of myself.
Yeah. Okay. So can we strip that down a bit? What does self-exploration mean to you, Eric?
Well, I think it's understanding, what you perceive, or what's happening to you, and understanding that, maybe some of the mental attributes that go along or have caused that, right? So for me, growing up, when I was in high school and college, I would have a lot of anxiety, socially, or around identity. Just, who was I? Because I understood, I think, as early as my mid-teens, that something was different, even though my parents had told me that I was adopted as soon as I could really understand. That might have been 5, 6, or 7 years old. But I didn't really understand the disconnect, or until I was in my teens. And then I didn't really understand the anxiety until I was in my 30s, that might have been related to adoption, and maybe not knowing my birth parents. And I think that was also a catalyst as to why I wanted to seek them out.
Yeah. So we talk, and similar to me, right? There's these long timelines.
Yeah.
Where nothing is really happening. The changes, and we're just living our lives like we live our lives, and then these moments happen that lead us to a whole new world. So, was there a particular time was a particular event in your teens when you realized that something was amiss here, Eric?
Yeah, I think I want to say it was either my sophomore or junior year in high school. Yeah. I would have to get up and leave classes, as I got really anxious, and I couldn't really pinpoint what the anxiety was about. It wasn't about a social circumstance. It wasn't really about anything. It was just, the class was going on as normal. Something triggered in me that just wasn't comfortable, and I was never really comfortable in my own skin for, quite a few years, until I started just kind of understanding and dissecting a little bit about what those things were about.
Yeah. So did you start off? You did some work there in your late teens, and then things settled down, and then something came up again in your 30s. Yeah.
Well, I think it was a variety of different things in my 30s. It was when I was 29 years old, I climbed Denali, which is the highest mountain in North America, and a part of that climb, I kept a journal, and just obviously you're alone in a tent, you're alone on a glacier, you have plenty of time to think, and so I did a lot of reflecting in the journal, and had decided at that point, and it really never was something I never thought of before, but as I was in that situation, it brought about my desire and interest to find my birth family. And that kind of started the whole self-exploratory process. And then a lot of events happened in my life, in my 30s, goods and bads, that made me just really want to understand, is this connected to anything? Are my beliefs around this connected to anything? And then, when I was in my late 30s, getting to meet my my half sister, my half brother, my aunts and uncles, really helped to fill in a lot of the identity or pieces that were missing in my teens and 20s.
Yeah. So a lot of people talk about missing roots here, right? The roots that keep us grounded. Was that what it was for you? That's what it felt like to you, or how would you kind of summarize that?
Ooh, how would I summarize what was the missing roots part?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just, I guess it's just a metaphor, really. People talk about, like not be, you said about not being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
You talked about kind of not knowing, having some parts missing. That
Sure.
roots thing is one that comes up, and I guess it was my suggestion, so I'm just.
No, it's great, and I'll give an example. I reached out to find my birth mother and found out that she had passed away from having cancer, and was able to write a letter to her husband, who was not my father, not my birth father, and I got a response from my half sister, and we wound up getting together at a cafe. She brought her husband and their newborn, and we sat there for 2 hours and we talked. 2 hours went by in about 15 seconds. It felt like, and it had the feeling of, if you've had a friend that you haven't seen in 10 years, then all of a sudden you guys get together and you picked up right where you left off. It was like we were picking up right where we left off, and it was also like I was engaging with kind of a female persona to myself, right? Same kind of mannerisms and similarities, and it just put a piece of the puzzle back into place, to give me a little bit of understanding of just identity in general, and that's what I think about when I think of your question around roots. Is just that one connection just gave me so much, and now we're very close, my half sister, my half brother, and I, and that just keeps continuing to fill in a lot of the questions or things that I was missing.
Yeah. And so did she help you with any information about the past? Did she know, did she know about you before the letter that you sent?
She did not know. So the letter was a surprise, and her father shared that with her, and of course she immediately reached out and wanted to connect, and luckily for me and my family that we were able to do that, and we are extremely close to this day, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And she was also able to give me a lot of insight and background and pictures and things like that of my birth mother, which was just another incredible piece of the puzzle that I got to fill in.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how, like, we have these views of, we go on this search and reunion, and it doesn't always work out like we expect. So I actually found out that my birth mother had died as well, and she died of cancer too, as a tragic coincidence. And there's this idea. I had an email from somebody that I'd asked to be on the podcast, and she was a fellow adoptee, and she was contending that we can't heal without reunion. And I thought, well, that's not my experience.
Right.
I found out that she had died, but the paperwork that I got from my adoption file that helped me see the reason for her relinquishing me, that was profoundly healing. And here we have you and your experience. You're feeling more grounded. you've got a better sense of those roots, and yet that without actually having to, without being able to reunite with your
Yeah.
because she died.
I think healing more comes from gratitude, and that kind of comes back to my point on, you know, our perceptions and being able to look at being adopted, you know, being given up for adoption as something to be thankful for, in that, you know, the circumstances of somebody's life were such that they would do that, and be grateful for your life no matter how good or bad it is, and then be able to see that side of the coin. Because if you live in anger the whole time, or you live in resentment, or whatever that is, it's not healthy, and it doesn't really honor what happened, and that is, you know, being able to be here, and you know, being able to have been placed with a great adopted family, and been lucky there, because I know not a lot of people have that same experience. So I think there's a lot of healing and gratitude versus, you know, getting to meet anybody. Obviously that helps, but if you're going into it with a state of gratitude and in your heart, then you can see the right side of the coin.
Yeah. Just to make it clear, so you're talking about spontaneous gratitude from within, not that kind of forced gratitude from without. You see what I mean? Like,
correct. Yeah. Like your own perception, being able to see things and identify, well, what do I have to be grateful for as a result of this, you know, the life I've been given, and that's, I think, is a great way to look at it, versus, you know, with anger and resentment, which is easier to do.
Yeah. I can see from my own spate that anger and resentment was a barrier for me.
Yeah. Choose you up, and it weighs on your personal relationships and other relationships you have in your life. And you can see that after you know, maybe, and this comes back to the point where, you know, reflecting back on yourself and having that objective nature to yourself, is being able to say, okay, well, maybe the reason I was angry because I was angry about this, you know, in my life, or you know, whatever that may be. Or maybe the reason I'm not good in relationships with this type of person is because of, you know, the resentment I still hold. And, you know, if I change my perspective and the way I look at things, and maybe even my understanding of those things, does everything around me change?
Yeah, it certainly does. I think there's a couple of things off this. We are talking about our version. So,
yeah,
you know, you see the on, let's say, on some Facebook, and hear it from in conversations. You know, like we're told to be grateful, and we don't feel grateful, and it's just like that sends, you know, the steam is coming out of our ears, because we're being denied our own emotions. Right? We're being told that our own emotions are invalid, and then and also and then we come to this anger thing, where I see adoptees being angry about being called angry.
sure.
You know, like, well, we have every reason to be angry, and these things, they can kind of snowball, can't they?
Sure. But it's I think it's more than that, right? I think you're always going to have the anger and resentment, but again, it's looking at both sides. So let's say you sat down and you wrote down, and I've done this and many times. It's like, you know, what are the things you're angry about, or what are the things you're upset about, or that you resent, or et cetera, and make a list, right? And you probably come up with 30, 40 things in a few minutes, right? But then sit down and create parity in that thinking. What are the things you're grateful for? What are the 30, 40 things you're grateful for? And that was really hard for me. And I struggled with that, but I forced myself to look that way. And when I did it changed my perceptions, because I know, like, I can still be upset, right? But at the same time, like, I can see the other side, versus if I ignore the other side, I'm forcing myself to kind of stay in a state of depression, right? If I can see both sides, I'm more balanced in my perspective. It's made the world of difference to me, in being able to do that, because I let go easier. I don't hold on. I don't let something that I perceived earlier, that I would perceive earlier in my life as toxic, versus now as a blessing. And I start to see that just through forcing myself to, from my own point of view, not an external forced, you got to be grateful type deal,
Yeah.
from my own desire to understand. And the more I did that, and having met my birth family, the more I realized that was actually all the stuff that was on the positive side that was true, not the negative side.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you come across a lady called Byron Katie?
Byron Katie,
Byron
no.
Katie, yeah. So the as you were talking about writing down the things, I was thinking back to my own false beliefs, right?
Yeah.
So she has a four-step process for investigating our beliefs, and I think it's the work.org or the work.com, and it's just a template of 4 questions, which encourages to go deep on our beliefs and actually, almost like meditate on them. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like concentrate on them, focus on them, see what comes up for us, and it's a very powerful kind of it's a belief exploration, and looking at the biggest ones that we have, like, so this idea, I think the belief that there's something wrong with us. You mentioned the word stigma at the top of the stop of this conversation, and when I think of stigma, I'm thinking, well, that's external, but it's also internal. And one of my fascinations is how this relinquishment or placing of that's an interesting one, actually. I was talking to a birth mother who was on the show a couple of months ago, and she said, no, I didn't relinquish my son. I placed my son for adoption. Now, I don't normally get hung up on the vocabulary, right? Because I'm looking for something deeper. But something in the way that she said that, relinquish, think about, put my son up for adoption. Made an adoption plan. There's all these different words, right? So one of my fascinations is how can that, I think of because we haven't got any kids, we're on a 4th dog now. We got a 4th and a 3rd and 4th dogs, right? And the 4th one hasn't cried, but the other 3 did. On their whilst they'd been taken from their furry mums, from their mums, and come to live with us. And you think of that it sends chills down my spine, that crying and that loneliness. Somehow you've got this non-verbal feeling of abandonment, and somehow that becomes a belief that there's something wrong with us, and so one is very nebulous and powerful and painful, but it has no words, and then somehow that turns into this through our brains, it's grown.
Festers as anger, usually. Sorry? It's usually festers as anger, right?
Yeah. And when somebody told me that, and thank you for reminding me, because I'd forgotten that, actually, anger is usually the flip side of pain.
Yeah.
Especially for guys, apparently. Massive stereotype here, but yeah, the anger is a signal of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got these things going on, and this kind of implicit belief that there's something wrong with us, but we can't really put our finger on that, can we? Like you were talking about in your mid teens, your sophomore year and or junior. We can't really put our finger on there.
I think you're constantly worrying about like why am I having this thought, or like what not even being able to connect the dots that it is because you're adopted, but it's like why am I angry right now, right? I'm kind of I'm in a happy situation, but I feel angry, and when you're early in your life, I don't think you're good at connecting dots, let's say, or recognizing something without help, right? Like trying to do it on your own is really difficult, and so I think that's why it took me a long time to figure out, hey, maybe this is correlated. Was just because I did more self-exploring in my late 20s, early 30s than I did in my teens and early 20s.
Yeah.
And you start to realize maybe that's it.
Was there a moment when it clicked? Was something clicked for you on that when you joined other dots? Do you remember one?
No, I don't think it was a moment when things clicked. I think it was more of just me becoming more attuned to something that happened to me one day and the way I responded, and me thinking, is this correlated? And obviously sometimes you go into analysis paralysis thinking everything is, and that's not necessarily the case, right? Like who you are is who you are, and your character is obviously shaped by some of the bad things that happen in your life, or just maybe some of the bad reactions that you have in your life. And you start to maybe overanalyze things. And so I didn't really think it was a particular moment where I realized that, as more of just a kind of an ongoing thing that I paid attention to.
Were there any similarities as you did that, looking at yourself? Were there any similarities to the moments where anger came to the fore?
Like subsided, or
when it came up and when it subsided? Was there any? Do any familiar context come to mind?
Is there any context when it came up? I'm trying to think now, back into my teens and 20s. I think a lot of times it manifested in anxiety as well, as I said earlier. And sometimes that just correlated to me wanting to leave a particular situation. Whatever situation I was in, it didn't really matter what it was, but there was usually it was usually a social setting, right? Whether that be a classroom or a group or something like that, where I just needed to leave. I just needed to be away, because I was just getting anxious about something, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and then I would get really angry about that. And the more I learned, that part of that identity crisis that I was having early on was related to adoption, that anxiety dramatically subsided in social settings, because it was that's the thing I paid attention to the most, and saw was something that was, I'll say, messing with me, whether that was from a personal side, a business side, or something like that, and being able to identify that and deal with it, because out of the anxiety came anger for putting me in the situation to have to leave that, and then the anger of like, what was this really about? And working to figure that out and then correct it or dissolve it.
Wow. Because it's circular, isn't it? And it's circular, and we go down it's a vicious cycle rather than a vortex, isn't it? I think of a vortex. We're spinning down until something breaks.
So much is impacted, right? Like, a lot of the adopted people I know, relationships, took some time to figure out, just having relationships, whether they were friends or partners or, whatever that was about, because of adoption was maybe a little differently because your mental model was different, or whatever that might have been. That's also an issue.
Yeah. As I was thinking through, whilst you were thinking through, the one that came up for me is actually being understood.
Being understood?
Being
What do you mean by that?
Well, being understood, not being understood as was a common context for anger coming up for me.
Oh, okay.
So, and that still happens. That still happens for me. I think it's less frequent now. But I had a. So today, this is a addition, an extension to our house.
Yep.
That I'm sitting in right now, and the builder and I,
Yeah. So you're talking different languages.
We're talking different languages, and we've got a different. We've got different maps. We've got a different level. We've got a different understanding of what trust means. Right.
So it's interesting you say that. I don't know how I would correlate my thinking around that. However, that's one of the things that I thrive on in business. And maybe it's because of something to do in my past there, but we do a lot of mergers and affiliations for nonprofits. And part of what I do to make those help those transactions be successful is I'm translating the misunderstoods, right? Like one culture speaks one way, another speaks another way, and they mean the same thing, but they're kind of missing their marks. And a lot of times that can mean the difference between a successful relationship and a bad one is just the understoods in communication. But it's interesting you say that, because I think that's one of the areas that I would thrive in supporting others.
Yeah, to decode it. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the guy. Like he was billing in advance, and he was behind on his schedule, but he was still billing. He'd set up his invoice system to bill as if it was still on schedule, and then
okay.
And we paid him some money up front, and then there was a fallout, and he was almost threatening not to come. There was an undercurrent that he was threatening not to be there unless we paid him for a bill that was like 4 days. We'd had for 4 days.
Right, but it was on work that was going to be done next month.
But it worked that he hadn't finished. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't. I couldn't talk to the guy. I really couldn't. I just couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust him. His model and my model of the world was so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's kind of how we form, circles and stuff like that in our own lives, is obviously people that we bring in that we can communicate with, let's say.
Yeah.
And then you find out the ones that you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. The group, but group settings, I can see the group settings is probably, if you're still listening, listeners, and maybe have a look at what stuff comes up for you, and is there a commonality in terms of the context, whether it's me and feeling misunderstood, anger about the guy not doing what he said he was going to do. That's a big thing for me.
Yeah, that's a big thing for me too.
Yeah, people
doing what I said I'm going to do, and fulfilling on that is really big for me. And if I don't do it, which is usually rare, is where I get pretty upset with myself.
Yeah,
because I think to your point, like I've violated an internal term to my being, and I think that is a big part of what I believe in, is if you say something that you're going to do something, you got to follow through on it.
So like we had this call scheduled today, and I've had some problems with my online banking. I was onto the call center to get this stuff resolved, and I'm thinking, well, I'm talking to Eric in half an hour. Do I make this call? Can I get this? Can I get?
Oh, you're never going to resolve anything in 30 minutes with IT.
I just managed to do it literally with 30 seconds to spare. I saw the notification that you joined the Zoom. I clicked on, and it was 1 minute to the hour, and I thought, I've done that because I was feeling that pressure. Like I've said, the other thing that's going through my head is, why did I start? Why did I start resolving this thing? Because it's going to take less than half an hour. But don't I? But it's very important to me. So I would have had to hang up. I would have to hang up and go through all the same old spiel tomorrow, because I wouldn't let. I'd do what I say I'm going to do.
Yeah,
that's the one. So the stigma, then you talked about stigma, and we've talked about stigma from an internal perspective and then also an external perspective. Have you come across that?
From an external perspective, yeah. Not personally, no. But then again, I've just in my 40s have started to kind of make public in some of the charities I support around adoption that I was adopted. I mean, before I wasn't public with it, and that was by no plan or design. It just, social media didn't exist to give you channels to be able to do that those days. But the more I look to the gratitude, the blessings, and things like that I've come to realize are, part of being adopted. The more I'm excited to talk about it and share with others. And when I do share, I get friends that are in my circle that reach out and say, "Hey, oh, by the way, I was adopted as well," which I didn't know. And so those conversations lead to some great story time and getting to share each other's stories, which are obviously dramatically different for each individual case. But it's really exciting to have those opportunities.
I was talking to an adoptee just this afternoon who had a really bad experience with her adoptive family, mainly a mum, actually. And I think we can look at the relinquishment trauma, but we can also look at the trauma that goes on within the adoptive family, and we can dissect them for the point of conversation here. But they're all rolled up, in one individual. It's all rolled up into one individual and their view of the world and their view of adoption. What's your take on all that? Have you dived into that sort of stuff with the other adopted people that you've spoken to?
In terms of their backgrounds or how they dealt with the trauma?
Yeah, in terms of this relation, the experience in the family as well, in the adoptive family.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is several of the people that I know decided within very similar time periods to myself to look for and search for their birth family. And that was a common experience that we got to share. And some of those stories, like mine and a few others I know, weren't great. And another person went to look for their mother and found out she had passed of a heart attack the same year that he was looking for her. And then somebody else I know reached out to their mother, and mother didn't really want to connect or stay connected. And so that definitely would emphasize the abandonment kind of feeling for somebody. But I think the difference in terms of what I've noticed is the folks that the people that I know that have entered into the decision to find their birth family or have some of those hard discussions are at a point in their life where they're very successful, or they're mature enough to handle it. I don't know how I would have handled, meeting my birth family, or, knowing my birth mother had passed, in my teens or even in my early 20s. I don't think I was mentally mature enough to understand the situation, or I don't think I was mentally mature enough to have engaged in the relationship in a way that would be really meaningful to me. And so I'm glad things kind of manifested the way that they did, in the timelines that they did. But I'm finding that some of the folks that I know had very similar circumstances where, when they had decided to reach out or take that initiative, that they were in a better place. And so I do think that, where you are in life and maturity and things like that does make a difference, or at least it made a difference for me and others I know.
Yeah, yeah. You when I asked you at the start about what came to mind with thriving adoptees, you talked about the positivity around this.
Yeah.
And I again, as the same lady I was talking to, she said, "Oh, well, I didn't think I could come on the Thriving Adoptees podcast because I'm not sure whether I'm thriving." Basically, I thought it was for only for people that were already thriving. I thought, oh, that's an interesting one, because I've heard that before, right?
But hold on, let me just jump in real quick. What I have found about the way my life has manifested, and some of the things that I've seen, is that the areas that I have seen lack, meaning gaps in my life, or things lacking in my life, have become part of my purpose in life, right? And so, maybe in your example with her, she thinks she's not successful, but the job she has right now is fulfilling part of the purpose, or part of what she feels is missing in her soul, right, because of being adopted. And I would say the same thing happened for me, in that, I think the blessing of being adopted gave me a gap or a lack to want to fill, and that led to me having a really awesome purpose in life, or at least understanding that was part of it. And so, yeah, I mean, that I'll just leave you with that, because where we have lack, usually where we have I mean, look at the podcast that you're delivering now. It's like, where you have lack is where you have purpose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's all about passing it on. When I was having my wobbles around this stuff, I was lucky to be in an area where people encouraged me to. I was going down the trauma tunnel, and life, it was getting a bit darker. But luckily, I was in a place where people actually encouraged me to turn around 180 degrees, and I could still see light at the other end of the tunnel. So I didn't go further down into the darkness. I looked, and so that's the thing with, I say, when I'm doing public speaking, I say, well, I think we've become trauma obsessed. Like the adoption sector or industry, however you want to call it, and the adoptee world on Facebook, I think we've become trauma obsessed. We're like, it's trauma all the way around. And I think that we should be trauma informed. So nobody's denying any trauma here. But I'm saying that we should be healing obsessed or hope obsessed. Hope obsessed, I guess, in the first step, because that's being able to see light at the end of the tunnel. That's the hope. The hope is light. And then healing obsessed, to keep on going in that direction, and not and rather than turning back down and going further down the trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that part of maybe what makes us stronger later in life is that we've experienced some of the negatives, or we've spiraled, or we've had bad experiences, or made stupid decisions, right, that led us to stupid situations that we could have been avoided, but we got what we got. And now maybe some of that was a result of, the anger, hostility, or anxiety around around being adopted, for me, identity, right? And but now it's given us the strength, because we've been able to figure our way out of it, to be able to rebound, to be able to help others. And that's what I'm very grateful for now, is I can look at all the crap I dealt with, or all the stuff that caused me anxiety, or caused me to look at myself and just like not like a decision I made, or a relationship I, screwed up, or, things like that. And reflect back and realize I got so much from that. Like those terrible decisions, I got so much for in my future, to understand the man I want to be and the one I didn't.
Yeah. Wow. That's the learning stuff, right?
That's the learning. And obviously you can't learn unless you screw up, because that's what makes you have that pit in your stomach that says, that's not me. That was a horrible decision, right? None of that sits well with me. And you can feel your stomach when it tells you, and it tightens up. And either you pay attention to that or you don't. I mean, if you pay attention to it, you can learn from it, and you can start to dissect it and think about it and stuff like that. And if you don't, you're just going to repeat the same behavior and the same, and be stuck in the same world of misery, or whatever it is that you're in, versus realizing that's there for a reason. It's telling you something good.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. So I'm conscious you've got a hard stop in a few minutes. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about?
Oh, I mean, I can talk for hours. No, I think that it's been one of the most defining things in my life, is being adopted, and I didn't realize how much it shaped my character, my purpose, what I'm actually doing right now in my life, until I got a little older and I started to pay attention to things like that, and why is this happening, and ask the hard questions, and it changed my whole perception to be grateful versus angry or resentful, and that was a powerful journey. And again, it didn't happen like a light switch. It was probably over 15-20 years, but yeah, it's something I wouldn't trade in for anything, because I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have the relationship with, I always tell my family, I've got 3 families, because I'm married. So I've got my wife's side, I've got my adopted family, and my birth family. So I'm triple blessed.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Eric. Thanks for sharing so openly. I appreciate that. And thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.
Thanks, Simon.